look at that and hopefully reflecting on the year that is ending and maybe some sense of outlook for the year ahead. In terms of the immediate market, we've got oil prices falling again this morning in Asia, down for the third day in a row. We've got a 1% drop so far in trading, with Brent under $73 a barrel after having made somewhat of a recovery last week. Actually, last week was the biggest gain in weekly gain in I believe 4 or 5 months. So that has run out of steam. And let's get some sense of perspective as to why that is. Let's kick off this morning with Amina Bakr, Deputy Bureau Chief and Chief OPEC Correspondent at Energy Intelligence. Amina, we've had the Saudi oil minister making some strong words earlier in the week. Your thoughts on the market as it looks at the moment? It's kind of run out of steam and OPEC is putting more supply into that space.
Good morning, Sean, and thanks for having me again here. Yeah, we saw the comment basically from the Saudi energy minister saying that there is lack of investment in the industry, and that's going to impact supply in the short term and the longer term. Yeah, I think that the prices that we're seeing now, the drop is temporary. According to the latest OPEC report, the new variant of the virus didn't really factor in changing their demand forecasts as much. I think it's more of a psychological effect that's impacting markets now, and prices are still at around the $72 mark. They're not below that. The real thing to watch here, Sean, is how OPEC Plus members are going to struggle in delivering incremental supply to the market over the coming months, because already this 400,000 barrels a day that they are promising, it's not actually hitting the market. We're getting less of that. And into 2022, when we hit the summer, that's when I think that we might see an increased tightness in the market. And as well, I mean, that's going to, again, spark perhaps consumer concern. We have to wait and see if they decide to release other reserves. And that's something that I'll be watching very closely.
Let's welcome Henning Gluistein, Director, Energy, Climate and Resources at the Eurasia Group. Henning, we're seeing some of the explanation, nonetheless, at least in today's markets, that crude is coming off because the idea that supply may exceed demand as we move into the new year. There is a sense that towards the end of the winter demand, that there will be an oversupply. Still a lot of debate as to where we're at in that balanced supply and demand. And of course, as Amina mentioned there, the OPEC Plus is committed to adding 400,000 barrels a day per month, but have failed to do that in the first 4 months of this agreement. Where do you see that balance going into the end of the year?
Thank you, Sean, for the invite. It's true that we do indeed expect a slight oversupply going into 2022. That is because Omicron has triggered tighter restrictions around the world, especially in Europe, but this will probably spread, sadly, globally in the next couple of weeks. But as Amina said, heading towards mid-2022, maybe even Q2 2022, it does look like the demand situation from the oil markets perspective will improve, because Omicron, all virologists, touch wood, are currently saying hopefully we'll say yes, a big outbreak, but the pandemic situation will not be as bad as it has been, given vaccines and treatments. So 2022 should see a demand situation. So the demand drop hopefully should only be fairly short term. And that probably tells us why OPEC is trying to increase supply as it is.
Surprisingly, this morning, the positive news out of China is not supporting the markets. Victor Yang, senior editor at JLC Network, Technology in China putting out their reports regarding China's throughput, refinery throughput in November. Perhaps you can update us on your recent report on that.
Yes, well, so good morning.
Good morning.
And
Victor.
yeah, and yes, well, the throughput in November had well rebounded for the first time in 5 months. I mean, year on year. I mean, and this is because the country's diesel supply began to be tight in late September, and then it lasted through October. So refineries were told to boost their crude throughput to ensure diesel supply. But diesel supply became abundant again in late November after refineries boosted their supply significantly in October and the first half of November. So in December, they are actually starting to cut the throughput again. And one issue with China this year is that its production, including oil production and other production, is growing much faster than demand. So that's one issue. And we expect this to continue next year. And for next year, we will be focusing more on domestic demand and how the government will stimulate demand.
Sorry, just say that point again, that supply is growing faster than demand in China?
Yes.
Is that what you...
Yeah, I mean, industrial production and some other production is growing faster than demand this year. And so that's an issue. And last time you also said the real estate market is burning a hole in people's market, and you really got it. And it's kind of issue because people had so much money, tied to the real estate market. When they buy the house, they need to borrow a lot of money from the bank, and they need to pay the mortgage months for a long time, for many years. And another large expenditure is in education, say training, particularly mostly on training outside school. So China is also tackling that problem now. It was so profitable. This industry was so profitable that a lot of people were rushing into the industry. So, and there were all kinds of different quality. I mean, education, outside school education, and a lot of problems.
Sector that the government was closing down, basically.
Yes,
right?
It's closing down. So it's trying to, yes, this will help to stimulate demand because people will have more money to spend if they do not have to spend so much on training, on such education. And that's kind of deepening parents' anxiety because they were so competitive. And
if you take in the major Chinese urban centers, your average employee is spending 50% of their income on housing, and then above that on extracurricular education for their kids. There doesn't leave much money left for
very little
going
left.
to McDonald's or whatever.
Yes, that's a problem. So it's now tackling these problems and focusing on domestic consumption more than on export. So that's one way.
With the elevated throughput, Victor, in October, November, up to 14.5 million barrels in the refinery throughput, will that signal that China will buy more oil now? They might raise their import levels to fill those gaps?
Yes, and after some consumption this year, and demand is expected to rebound modestly next year. And we had a new refinery coming on stream at the end of this month. That's 320,000 barrels per day refinery in East China, a private one. And next year, I believe you had done some analysis of the documents released after the government's economic conference last week.
Yes.
And it focused on economic stability, and this is the first time in many years. And we would see a lot of kind of more fiscal support from the government. Then, this will be different from other countries because we didn't have so much fiscal support this year. But the government is now going to give them more fiscal support next year. And so this will also kind of drive up demand in the future, I mean, including energy demand. And it's now encouraging the development of new energy too. So it doesn't include the new energy into its dual control policy, the dual energy control policy. So this will be kind of stimulus too.
Amina, looking a little bit more reflectively on the year as we come to the end of 2021, quite often when you ask what the biggest surprise is, at least in relevance to the energy markets, has been the sort of alliance of OPEC Plus keeping their strategy and their 20-odd countries together. We might have started the year with some talk about people who weren't complying with their agreements, but that kind of faded away. What's your sort of takeaway from the year, reflecting from an OPEC point of view, and then looking to where that carries through into the new year?
Yeah, Sean, I think the cohesion that we saw in the group really was a stark contrast to what happened in 2020, the big blow up, and then they united. Everyone is in agreement that this alliance is benefiting the group, and they want to stick together. And despite the disagreements, again, we saw with the UAE wanting to change baselines and so on, that was resolved. And I think moving into the future, there is this.
Is that resolved? Would you think? I mean, one of the questions I might ask you in terms of the decision they made recently, which not to suspend the agreement, there was a big expectation in the market that that might have been an option for them, given how dramatic oil prices had fallen in the week before the meeting, that because of this complicated quota agreement, it would have been very problematic to revisit it by suspending the agreement.
I can tell you something, Sean, just from the inside. I can tell you that, for example, Saudi Arabia's officials went into this meeting without a set proposal in their mind. They waited to hear from other producers. And with the other producers, I mean, Russia, UAE, Kuwait, Iran, and the rest of them, there was an agreement that they needed to stay the course and not change the agreement. And Saudi Arabia agreed to that. There was no other proposal. There wasn't really a kind of inner fighting between the group. What is going to happen at the next meeting, Sean, is the vote for the new Secretary General. And as we understand that this top job is quite a diplomatic figure. I mean, Mohammed Barkindo has helped a lot in keeping this group united and also opening communication channels with the US consumers. I mean, he's a really important figure in doing that. In addition, of course, to the oil ministers. For the time being, there's only one candidate for that job, which is the Kuwaiti previous OPEC governor, Haytham Al-Ghayth. There might be more presented at the upcoming meeting. It's going to be on the 3rd of January. Iraq might surprise everyone and present a candidate. Venezuela as well, maybe, but they're going to be voting, and the majority of the votes that go to a candidate means that this participant will become the next OPEC Secretary General in the summer. In August.
Yeah, so the position isn't immediate, it's voted for later in the year. Henning, it's always kind of amazing when you hear about, I mean, how complicated OPEC Plus can be, but at the same token, inside that group, there is some very competitive countries, let's just say, and we end the year here in the Gulf with the GCC Head of State Summit that's taking place at the moment, and issued a kind of a unusually strong statement overnight, which I don't believe they've ever taken before, which is an attack against one is an attack against all. It's a bit of that NATO framing, and that Iran needs to stop talking and needs to actually start doing some action. I'm just wondering your reflections of the year vis-a-vis the regional geopolitics and how they play out or might play out.
Thanks. Actually, just to add, I thought Amina's insights into OPEC there were really valuable and helpful. reflecting on this year, I mean, yeah, wow, where to start and where to stop? I don't know. Iran, for instance, there were hopes, including Eurasia groups, that there would be a deal between Iran and the United States in 2021. That's clearly not happened. So there's a reflection.
I mean, there was a lot of momentum back in the summer before the election and the change of government. They met 10 times, 10 weeks in a row. You would think, my gosh, they must be meeting for a reason, and then.
Yeah, clearly it didn't go very well, did it? And now our expectation is that there will probably not be a deal in 2022 either. So that's not very nice. But on
it is a complicated point in the sense of, from the Iranian sticking point, it would appear. I mean, in the variety of fractures that may be in the middle of that. Obviously, you've got the P5 plus Germany, so you're talking a lot of big countries. But ultimately, the only thing the US can bring to the table is an executive order. They cannot bring legislative, confirmation of this treaty. And from the Iranian point of view, that's hard to build your house on again.
Yeah, I mean, this is a bit of the problem that in theory, everyone wants a deal. Iran wants to export more oil. The United States wants to shift away and have less problems in the Middle East and focus on China. But the reality looks very, very different. Iran has hardened its position. Even Biden, who wanted to soften his position, but can't really. So that's reality. We're stuck sort of in a piece of drying cement, and that's not going very well. On the positive side, of course, Middle East, the UAE and Israel, this rapprochement, this deal only started a couple of years ago under Trump, of all people, and it's continuing. So there is some positive development there as well. Which I think is worth keeping in mind.
Well, it's certainly interesting to see the regional actors find these moments together. Obviously, as you say, quite historic in some way, the Israeli Prime Minister in Abu Dhabi yesterday. But, you had the Turkish president in Qatar, the MBS doing a tour, the UAE senior intelligence in Tehran. Clearly, there seems to be some desire regionally to sort out their own problems, if you like, and not expect the big bodyguard to keep everything in order. Victor, your thoughts on 2021? It seems to me, if I was having one big surprise of the year, it's possibly China's, I don't know, what would you call it? Has it been a wobble? Does it, this is normal? What's your sense of the Chinese economic year as we come to the end of 21?
Yes, well, as we said before, it's kind of mixed blessing. On the one hand, you got the GDP growing quite fast, and mostly due to infrastructure construction, exports, and some stuff like that. But on the other hand, a lot of companies, when industries are suffering more than last year, maybe more than last year, well, because of much higher cost. And so it means, well, a lot of companies will need to kind of shift their business or focus in the future and move away from business that every other business can get engaged in, say, innovative business, well, innovative technology. And that's one direction for the country in the future. Otherwise, it would be more and more difficult to survive. And particularly when the country is moving forward with the industrial structure. Yeah. So
you had said before, Victor, that the government in China had decided in 21 to prioritize reform over growth.
yes.
Is that continuing, or is that phase now over?
It's now kind of slowing down, and because it's facing more challenges than it previously expected. And at the beginning of the year, it was so kind of determination, and it reiterated many times, well, the importance of the supply side reform, the restructuring. But towards the end of the year, when the challenge became, well, bigger and bigger, And say for take September's power shortage as an instance, well, it had previously shut some, at least idle, a lot of coal mines before September. But when, well, coal prices surged and there was serious power shortage in late September, it had to go back to coal mines again. So it is a lesson. The government will have to, well, combine the new energy and the use of conventional energy such as coal together to make sure is what to ensure is energy is secure. Say we will not, well, close down these coal mines too fast. We will just keep them when the new energy is not so reliable yet.
When the wind stops blowing, we'll
Yeah,
turn on
yeah.
the coal-fired
Yes,
power
well,
plant.
Yeah,
Let's
so
go
you
to
will have
sorry, go ahead, just finish your point.
Yeah, so it had to kind of balance this restructuring and to ensure that, well, people's livelihood will not be affected too much because it can generate that many jobs all of a sudden. Say it
I think
generates.
the difficulty is at times when you try to sustain, or when you try to manage an economy,
Yes.
there's so many things pop up that you think you
Yes.
solve this problem and then this problem pops up.
Yes.
It's difficult to manage to manage that on all levels at all times, and that's why
Yeah.
I suppose the open economy has to sort of sort out its own problems. And when you start to manage them, it'll be interesting to see what the legacy of that is in 22
Yes.
as China tries to do the opposite, manage maybe some growth recovery. Let's go to the survey question and get the view of the room on this Iran deal. Will the US do a deal with Iran early in 22? This is a question that obviously, what time frame do you put in early? But I was thinking early feels like the first quarter. If it doesn't happen in the first quarter, I just can't see how it keeps on going. You know, the US election's coming. So early, I would say, means the first quarter. Yes or no? Amina, we look to the first quarter. We look to the future, 2022, as you mentioned earlier, the OPEC challenge and its next meeting even. Although this sort of the last meeting has never ended, right? We're still
it's still in session. It's the longest meeting ever.
So this meeting
that they used to do that at the Arab League, Sean.
Oh, really?
Didn't agree, on something, and I think they borrowed that phrase from the Arab League sessions. It just continues.
The Arab League would be chuffed to be still have a role in the world. But in terms of the outlook for the next meeting and the emerging challenge, as you articulated earlier, that every month that goes by is another month when OPEC's inability to supply more oil becomes ever more apparent. At what point does that start to put a stress on the organization?
Well, there is a need to review baselines. That's what I personally think. But reviewing baselines to give a country like Nigeria, for example, a lower baseline, that's going to be a huge issue, and that's going to cause conflict. And it's another can of worms that I think the organization is not ready to open, because just on paper, I mean, a lot of these OPEC plus states, they see their quota as their slice in the market. Whether they're able to deliver it or not, it's just a guarantee of their share in the market, and they don't want to change that in any of the official records. So
which of course includes Iran as well, right? That's my quota that you're.
That's why they were fighting. I mean, even before they were under sanctions, and they wanted to put a certain quota in the official records of OPEC to guarantee their market share when and if they come back to the market. So you see the significance of changing quotas. Yeah, that's something that we'll have to see if there is going to be a downward revision. I foresee that's going to cause a lot of problems.
Henning, your thoughts looking into the new year, what would you pick out that might be, input? We've got obviously the COVID piece that still loiters there. Omicron is the devil, it's not the devil. Every second day I get confused because some days it seems like, oh, it's not a problem. The next day it's like, oh my God, it multiplies like crazy. And even though it's not as devastating, it could overwhelm everything because it spreads so fast.
Well, yeah, thank you. You just mentioned it. Omicron is the great unknown. Like you say, I mean, I actually spent all of yesterday talking to virologists. It's a bit of a downer, but and it's like, if this situation around Omicron is that this new variant is turbo contagious, but not as bad, then maybe the situation isn't as bad. But even if this variant is just as bad as Delta in terms of health impact, but so contagious, then we're in serious trouble, because just the fact that so many people get sick means that even if only a few people get very sick, hospital systems get overwhelmed. And that is the big fear, and that is the big uncertainty for the first quarter. The positive news around that is that even with high contagious escape factor of Omicron, existing vaccines still prevent from serious situation, and all vaccines will improve next year, and all treatments will improve. And that is also, skipping back to oil markets, why by second quarter of 2022, most people hope that this scare is over. But we don't know it. We hope it, and that is the big uncertainty going into 2022. And it is only.
It does feel in some ways. It does feel in some ways that the market, the oil market, and the equity markets, most spectacularly, have kind of become immune to the resurging challenge of the COVID pandemic. Even when it rears its head, of course, we did see that big drop 2 weeks ago, but it came back. It's proving resilient again. It's vaccinated against COVID in a way. Right or wrongly, perhaps.
Markets, sure, yeah. I mean, like most people say, like, all right, this is bad news, but let's hope it's not as bad as we think it might be. And let's tumble into 2022 and, fingers crossed, and we'll see where we go. Yeah.
Without getting too inside baseball, but I know you're sitting in London, you have front row seat to the Boris Johnson show. How entertaining is it? How serious is it? Obviously, they had to pass legislation last night. He would have lost the vote if he didn't have the Labour on his side.
Yeah. I mean, whether you like or don't like Boris Johnson, the one thing is, this current prime minister cannot order a new lockdown. It doesn't work because of the news, what happened exactly a year ago. So if the situation around Omicron gets really bad and the government in Britain has to order new lockdowns, then it will have to happen under a new government, whether he or the country likes it or not. Whereas if it all blows over, then he's done it again. He's bumbled through, and 2022 might look a bit better than this year.
Yeah, I think his appeal is wearing off a little bit. That funny Joker guy with the crazy blonde hair that never turns gray. I mean, come on. Let's go to the survey question and see the result before giving Victor the last word. No. Will the US deal with Iran early in 22? 2-1, no. Victor, you've got some big moments coming soon in the new year. Obviously, the Chinese New Year at the end of January, usually a good time for seeing oil imports grow. But also then you have the Winter Olympics, which is now kind of under a little bit of a cloud around the tennis player. What does the new year look like for China?
Well, this will still be quite a different year from the past because of the restrictions. Well, and for now, there are still restrictions when you are traveling to some regions, say like to Beijing, or if you are traveling out of provinces or cities where there are new cases. Well, say I'm traveling to Beijing tomorrow and I had a test this morning, because when they are going out, when traveling to Beijing, you need a test. So, and this would be
traveling by train or plane or
however you train. So long as you go to Beijing, you need a nucleic acid test.
Okay.
And yeah, And so we expect these kind of restrictions to remain around the Chinese New Year. So there wouldn't be such a vibe. Around the Chinese New Year as before, perhaps, probably. That's one thing I'm sure about. And
is there
as for-
is there any desire, any sense in China to move away from this sort of zero tolerance level of COVID? That most other countries are finally kind of giving up and say, vaccinate, we live with COVID.
Yes, we had heard a lot of talks about living with COVID, abroad. But for China, it's not acceptable, it's not an option if the mortality rate is far above flu. Say it's now still same about 10 times higher, something like that. But if it doesn't get close to flu, the government will not open its borders and will not lift its restrictions. That's one condition.
Well, it's an interesting position. Obviously, the China one is, moments like Omicron come along and they seem validated to maintain this very strict zero tolerance.
Yes.
And we see this week, sadly, the US mortality rate on COVID passes 800,000 people have died in the United States from COVID, and one would have to assume that keeps on growing. So it is an interesting comparison. But that's a wrap. We now just want to point out we have a very good interview just to be posted, end of year review of the oil markets with Chris Bake, senior executive. Obviously, everybody knows him. Vitol, really useful insights. Chris always provides on all of these topics that we talked about today. So that'll be posted on the WhatsApp group after this call, and then on our Twitter handle at 12 o'clock. So Amina, thank you so much for joining us today and for joining us through the year. Great to have your contributions. There's no one better on OPEC than you. You know that. We all know that. Thank you. Victor, really appreciate your time joining us from China. Henning as well. Really great to have you. Happy holidays and all, whatever your particular flavor might be. And we really appreciate it. And we'll see you in the new year. All the best. Thank you.
Let's hope for a better year. Yes.
Yes.
Bye, everyone. Merry Christmas.
2022. Cheers. Thank you.